What's going on, guys? So let's talk about one of the more popular Chun Kyun Kyut that gets thrown around. So it gets translated different ways because translation is always a bit of an interpretive thing. It's not something that you're going to always be able to do like a one-for-one on. So I'm not even going to really attempt to pronounce the Chinese on here. It's a little bit beyond my ability at the moment. But basically what we have here is this kind of, for lack of a better term, a couplet that is supposed to be somewhat rhyming and metered. That's how these kuen kyut work. And so the first line says that I think the best translation for it is Bong must not linger. And so the general idea here is that like both ting and lao and ting lao together as a phrase kind of means that something is lingering on, staying over, it's hanging out, right? And so the idea is that Bong is not meant to just hang out and be hanging out there forever. It is a temporary position, and that actually makes sense. If you go back to our video on how this stuff refers to, Fuk, Tan, and Bong refer to fencing guards, that first position in fencing is not a position you hang out in a long time. One, it just fatigues your shoulders more, which, funny enough, Bong doesn't only translate to wing. We popularly like to say wing arm or wing hand. But really, Bong also means shoulder and upper arm, indicating that you are actually using the upper arm as part of the actual action and shape of the technique. Then this mat sound, it really just is, must not. So the whole idea there is pretty straightforward. Bong really is not meant to be just hanging out. It is going to be a position that you move into and then pretty much immediately out of. Then it follows up with faan should be closely pieced together, closely paced, something like that. This one's a little bit more interpretive in nature. Faan again is the returning hand. It's really just kind of a fancy way of saying like hand cycling. Always, finish your action and remove from that action into another actionable position for the next action, i.e. you are going to be not just returning your hand from whence it came, but doing so for the intent of a repeated effort. And then the idea is that this concept of moving from one position to the next should be relatively closely paced together, density. And so the idea here is not just the Bong shouldn't linger on, but also that this concept of cycling and rotating the hands, moving them from position to position to position, should be in a relatively high density. You don't want to have a lot of empty space between. That's a really, really important thing. One of the things that we can talk about specifically with Bong is the fact that in Bong and several other positions, your elbow is up, leaving your trunk much more vulnerable. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily think of this as necessarily that big of a deal, except for it can be when you put it in context. So number one, back in the bare knuckle boxing days, people prized hitting the body a hell of a lot more than we often do now, and simply for the fact that without the extra hand protection, you were much more liable to damage your hand and wrist when striking somebody in the head. The frontal bone is very hard and can be used as a weapon, and so oftentimes if your aim is poor, things can go awry and you end up hurting your hand on the head. So punching to the body was going to be somewhat more common, and we know from like old bare knuckle boxing manuals that the mark, the diaphragm, was actually a very highly prized target. And then there's stories that Ip Man would encourage people to only punch to the body and open hand strike to the head. I don't know how true that is, but it's a story that I've heard. So when we look at this, one of the things that we're seeing is the body being open. Now, the other side of it too is, remember, Wing Chun is a close range system, which means that we are in grappling range very readily. And that means that if I'm picking up my arms, I'm also available to get hooked, overhooked, underhooked, tight-waisted. All those kind of things become a lot more available to my opponent when my elbows pick up. Now, here's the cool thing, right? These things are illustrating principles. So we might be saying it about Bong Sao because it's one of our primary bridge hands. However, this can extend to Lan Sao. This can extend to any strike that we are extending, especially when extending high. We are leaving the trunk open. We are leaving the arm and the shoulder girdle open to be hooked. We're leaving ourselves open to be struck. So the idea is that when you lift your elbow, when you are removing yourself from that closed guarded position, that you actually move yourself back into it as quickly as possible so that you can remain guarded again. Now, obviously, on the offensive side, the faan sao concept is just punches and bunches. It's throwing combinations. You want to be able to do that as well. And it's going to be very difficult to continue throwing things when you are stuck in these positions. Now, the internal rotation of Bong Sao is actually fairly well in end range for at least most people. And that being the case, being in end ranges is generally where you are weakest as far as your joint range of motion goes. So again, it's not always going to be a very strong position. Now, I often tell people it's not a particularly load-bearing position, but it doesn't mean you need to hang out there just because you're not bearing load on it. So hopefully this sheds some light on the phrasing. And you'll just have to pardon my bad kerning. I don't write in Chinese very often. So learning how to space the characters out is a little bit more of a chore than what I'm normally used to. But hopefully this illustrates one of the many phrases that we have that go back to the oral tradition. These are not things that were traditionally written down but passed on from teacher to student. And the handful of surviving ones we have left, we don't even know how traditional they are because things get added and lost with every generation. So, and then just with memory failing. So you never know exactly how true it is, but regardless of how truly traditional it is very useful. And that in many ways is more important. So I'm going to get out of here and I will talk to you again later. Good journey.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, give the dog a bone. You can follow us on our other social media accounts, and if you really like us, you can head over to Amazon and buy a shirt. You can also go over to Gumroad and purchase some of our instructional courses. All of the links will be provided and also on our website. If you happen to be in the Phoenix area, we would love to meet you. Come drop in for a class, even just to chat. And if you're looking for a new home, we would be happy to have you. So until next time, good journey.